So let's give an example from the New Testament, because this is one of those arguments that I think is like way better seen through examples than just explained, right? And so the paired disciples in Matthew 10:1 through 4, Jesus calls his 12 disciples. He gives them authority over demons, and he says that they can heal sickness and disease. He sends them out. Okay. And it's interesting the way that Matthew records this, because he pairs them together. Okay. And so it says here are the names of the 12: Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Okay, so that's weird. It kind of raises a question. Why does Matthew pair them this way? You know, a typical response might be, well, maybe Matthew thought 12 is an even number, and pairing them up like this would just make it easy for people to remember. But I think we have a better explanation than this, one that's more simple and more elegant. Mark 6:7, Jesus calls the 12. Mark is retelling the same story. And he began to send them out 2 by 2. And he gave them authority over impure spirits. So, okay. So let's rewind this a little bit. Matthew groups the disciples into pairs. Mark explains the pairing by revealing that Jesus sent them out 2 by 2. Mark provides a list of disciples, but he doesn't group them. That's kind of interesting. And Matthew mentions sending disciples, but not the 2 by 2 detail. He never mentions the 2 by 2 detail. So this highlights how one account incidentally answers a natural question posed by another, supporting the credibility of both accounts. All right, so pause, hold it. Someone immediately is going to say, oh, come on, Eric. You got to be kidding, you silly, fundy apologist, you pathetic McGroupie. Don't you know about the synoptic problem? The Gospels, they're dependent on one another, okay? Mark, he came first. Matthew and Luke helped themselves. There's word for word copying, okay? What is going on? Doesn't that just undermine your entire argument? You know, don't be ridiculous. Matthew could have just added that detail because he just wanted to tell a story, okay? So let's talk about the synoptic problem a little bit here. For those of you who don't know what the synoptic problem is, I'm just going to give a nutshell version of it. The synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, share significant similarities and overlap in their narratives. This resemblance has sparked extensive scholarly debate regarding their chronological order and their connections. A prevailing theory suggests that Mark came first, and Matthew and Luke utilized Mark as a primary source. Additionally, scholars propose the existence of a conjecture document known as Q, despite a lack of patristic and manuscript evidence. And there is a lot of debate about that. There are biblical scholars like Mark Goodacre who are very skeptical of the existence of Q and have written a whole book against the idea of Q. Common stories and sayings in Matthew and Luke, absent in Mark, are often termed Q material. The two-source hypothesis posits that Matthew and Luke drew from Mark Q, and they had some of their own unique material in crafting their gospels. There are other similar alternative theories, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so that's basically the synoptic problem in a nutshell. But there's some serious scholarly baggage that gets attached to this, and here's why I don't think that it undermines undesigned coincidences, okay? Because this is the very first thing that you will hear anytime you discuss undesigned coincidences is this, but my synoptic problem, you know, that's just supposed to end it. You hear scholars say this on podcasts and different things like that. People who should just like know better, who just apparently haven't looked into anything that like the McGrews have said or others have said about this particular argument, they just instantly dismiss it with this. And so there's a lot of scholarly baggage here. The use of the two-source hypothesis sometimes includes unwarranted assumptions beyond its core premise. These assumptions suggest that if Matthew or Luke's wording resembles Mark's, they merely copied Mark word for word without additional knowledge of the events, okay? And if they do add something, it's just embellishment or their own theological or literary purposes. Critics claim that if Matthew or Luke introduced changes or new material into a shared story, it implies they fabricated details without credible evidence. So this is just black and white thinking, okay? Such assumptions are questionable and lack strong deductive support from the notion that Matthew used Mark as a source. This version of the two-source hypothesis essentially erases Matthew and Luke as independent sources, portraying them as willing to alter or invent facts, often without justification. While similar wording may definitely indicate borrowing, and nobody is disputing that, okay, it doesn't imply a lack of additional factual information possessed by Matthew and Luke when they vary. Okay, pay attention to this. This is really important. Okay, this is the crux of the whole thing. Dependence is not a binary concept. Okay, let's picture this. Let's picture this scenario for a second. Matthew, I know this is a crazy idea. Maybe he was a disciple and likely had his own insights and memories, making it unreasonable to assume that he had no knowledge beyond Mark or another source. Luke also had his own notes and sources and could have included details that he wanted to add. And so Matthew, not wanting to reinvent the wheel, could have used Mark's gospel as an outline. He wasn't always there. He wasn't called until later on in Jesus's ministry, and so he may have taken Mark and used it as an outline, added his own material, and where he copied him, he copied him. Where he adds a detail, it doesn't mean, oh, you know what? I think this would be cool. Let me add this. Maybe it's because, like, hey, I don't know. He was there. He decided to add some details. Or Luke, he probably had notes. He probably had other information. So if he sees something that Mark left out, he could just simply add it. It doesn't mean embellishment. He could just add factual information. This rigid interpretation of the two-source hypothesis exceeds available evidence and should be rejected despite its popularity among scholars. Similar wording doesn't necessarily negate the possibility of independent factual accounts unless one assumes absolute independence where sources have no knowledge of each other's content. So in short, wrapping this whole section up, this whole synoptic problem objection, okay? Matthew and Luke are partially dependent while also incorporating their unique information, even when narrating similar events. This isn't merely a theoretical proposition. I'm going to show with a few examples here that this is actually what the evidence shows, okay? And so the synoptic problem is just, you're missing the point. The whole point of undesigned coincidences is to identify independence within the accounts, even where they overlap, okay? So again, I've heard biblical scholars make this mistake. I've seen people who are normally informed critics of Christianity make this mistake. Just slow down. Try and understand before you launch off into criticizing. Get this crucial distinction first.